they all say the same thing. WoW was exciting in the beginning and boring at the end. Oh my gosh, it got really hard to get people to care and vote.
Welcome to the world of governance, right? Do you think that every DAO, every online community should do some sort of stress testing as a game before they actually launch a DAO?
Governance doesn't happen on paper. The record of governance, the record on the blockchain, is a representative in your spreadsheet of all of the tiny things that went on behind the scenes.
How you see different technologies that are already coming up, whether AI or otherwise, that can make us effectively enhanced participants in governance systems.
Whenever I have any free time, I always want to make a game. It's very hard for me to play board games because I get jealous of the people that made them and I want to make them myself. So I always turn jealousy into creativity.
Hello, and welcome to Governance Futures, the podcast where we explore the past, present, and future of decentralized governance. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Jamila.
We just had the pleasure of talking to Amber Case, who is a technologist and startup entrepreneur, and I feel like too many hyphenates to quickly add into a simple introduction. But Jamila, how did you think the conversation with Case went?
I honestly, I've heard of Case, Calm Technology. We even met in the past, and I was coming with open mind, and I was actually sure where our conversation would take us. But I really enjoyed it. I learned so much about cyborg anthropology. And there are even some of the things, some of the references that Case was bringing was just so true. We talked about how different people behave in different settings, how, you invite people over and some feel more inclined to help out and be collaborative. Others may not be as collaborative and pretend to not notice dishes in the sink and all of that. I loved this systematic approach Case has to it. So I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It felt like we're just getting so much information and so many references, and we were just there to, I think, absorb and take all of that. So I'm very grateful that we had this conversation. But what about you, Eugene? How do you feel?
Yeah, likewise. That was such a fun conversation. And I realized that just in the first question, when a Case started talking about cyborg anthropology, and I believe Case mentioned that it was an actual major. I'm like, hold up. If we start digging into this, we're just going to spend an hour on cyborg anthropology. So I had to hold that follow up back. Um, but yeah, it was just such a fun conversation. I really appreciate Case's perspective at the intersection of just a lot of different disciplines. And Case has such robust knowledge and always pulls from the historical and the anthropological in ways that just adds such useful context when really trying to grapple with issues. So, yeah, the design element, the game and simulation element, like you mentioned, the cyborg anthropology element, all these were just such fun and different angles to get to talk about governance from. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation overall, as I hope will our listeners. And so please do subscribe, like, and listen wherever you're hearing this. Feel free to share with a friend. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to chat about anything. And here's the conversation with Case. Thank you so much for joining us today, Case. Really excited to jump into the conversation. And to kick things off, I wanted to ask you a question about your book, in which you explore how technologies ranging from phones to different platforms that are used these days are all pretty much playing one way or another into turning us into cyborgs by shaping how we live, how we remember, how we interact. And, given we're a governance podcast, we want to extend that lens to the world of governance and start the conversation by seeing, how you think our cyborg selves, so to put it, are reshaping participation, accountability, and legitimacy in online communities and DAOs.
Sure. So my first book is called An Illustrated Dictionary of Cyborg Anthropology. It came out of a wiki that I started in 2010 that someone installed for me as a birthday present. And I started writing these pages and really talking about different kinds of words. So some of the words were like panic architecture, when there's too much stuff that's happening in your life, or like the idea of, I'm just looking at a couple of these things, like diminished reality instead of augmented reality, where you make an augmented reality heads-up display that cancels out the reality you don't want to see, based on Steve Mann's iTap heads-up display wearable. So he could say, I don't want to see advertising. I'm going to detect ads and billboards, cancel them out, and put my own research papers that I'm reading on them so I can read research papers while I'm walking down the street and use this one-handed keyboard to type to people. And I was just really, really interested in college when I took my degree in cyborg anthropology and sociology, that this was even a field. So cyborg anthropology is the study of the interaction between humans and technology, how technology affects culture. It's also it's been midwifed into existence by my professor Deborah Heath at Lewis and Clark College. She's a very interesting person who studies things like biodynamic wine and foie gras. And she also was one of two researchers on the Human Genome Project, looking at networks of science and information and how those flowed. Cyborg anthropology came out in 1993, I believe, as a subsection of the anthropology of science. The term cyborg is not RoboCop or Terminator. It actually comes from a 1960 paper on space travel, in which the definition goes exogenous components are added to organisms to adapt to new ambient spaces, which in clear language is any any living creature that adds something to themselves in order to do something differently is a cyborg. So it doesn't need to be permanently attached, installed into your brain. Anyone who puts on a pair of flippers to go into the ocean or a pair of glasses to see better is a type of cyborg. You would call someone wearing glasses a restorative cyborg. You would call someone with a heads-up display that can see infrared an enhanced cyborg because it's enhanced over the norm line. And the definition, it was about space travel. It was, here you're going to put on the spacesuit to go into a new ambient space, literally space, to be able to be okay and adapt. You can look at animals using tools. You can look at horses with saddles. There's all sorts of different shapes and systems that we could consider cyborg. Someone with an insulin pump might be a higher tech cyborg than someone who's wearing a hat to go outside to protect themselves from the sun. So I was really interested in that. Also, a lot of these terms, I was originally putting them on a wiki, and usually in wiki, if you look at the software wiki itself, if you're not familiar, everyone's used Wikipedia. The software behind Wikipedia is called MediaWiki. MediaWiki came out of the very first wiki, c2.org, made by Ward Cunningham, who also helped make the Agile Manifesto. He started Wiki as a way for him and his friends to make an online decentralized study group for Christopher Alexander's A Pattern Language, which is a book all about how to make shared spaces, how to make group houses, how to make sure people don't go crazy around each other, and how to make human scale design. So it's a beautiful thing that in their study group, they created this software to help them study, and in doing so, make something that was very similar to both Christopher Alexander and the Tao Te Ching. The reason why it's the Tao Te Ching is one of my favorite translations of the Tao Te Ching is by this person named Peter Murrell. So when I first met Ward Cunningham on Wiki Wednesday in Portland, Oregon in like 2008, which happened to be my birthday, and I thought for my birthday present, as I told the audience, I would like to meet Ward Cunningham because I love wikis. And he sat down with me for 2.5 or 3 hours and just answered every single question. I showed him the software I had installed, and he showed me that Wiki is interesting because on a blog, your blog comments tend to go to seed, as in there's a lot of spam or the blog kind of goes old over time. But on a wiki, every error page is an opportunity. So every time you create a page, it's red, and you click on it and it says, there's no text in this page. Do you want to make it? And so you end up having these beautiful, resilient communities that build, and then you also have a bunch of communities that just read. So it's it's fantastic. I have my own wiki. It's got about 3 million views. It's got about over 1,000 articles that I've handwritten, and I've been keeping this thing alive for a long time as kind of a knowledge garden. Now, out of that, these weird terms that I wrote down, I worked with an illustrator and we produced this dictionary of cyborg anthropology. So along the way, I started going to Wiki conferences. There was a thing called Recent Changes that's a tab in Wikipedia where you can look at recent changes on articles, especially an article like, let's say, Michael Jackson on the day he died is going to have a lot of edits. Everybody wants to be the first person to change the Wikipedia article. If you're a Wiki nerd like me, heck yeah, that would be fun. So you need to look, you can look at the recent changes. There's also edit history, so you can see who made the changes, what IP address they're in, what's their user account, what changes they made, and you can also reverse and roll back. So for trolled pages or very difficult pages that might be controversial, you're going to be able to have wiki admins either be able to lock the page for some time or even write bots that can go in and help. So if you look at the insides of MediaWiki and Meta Wikipedia and all of these things, there's an incredibly well-made set of governance. And even with my own single member Wikipedia install, MediaWiki install, I was putting categories on pages that said draft and unfinished and finished, and using that to work with the illustrator and the editor to produce the book. It made the process very beautiful. So I think about this a lot because, going to Recent Changes camp, a camp just for a tab in Wikipedia, was incredible because behind the scenes to bring something like Wikipedia to life, there is a lot of governance. So I was really interested in writing that book to, in a sense, make the invisible visible as we were transitioning out of a more analog or very much like a transmissive media era where the information is being delivered to you via television or a read-write era into social media where we have a kind of container ship for our soul or a template itself that we're filling in, and there's kind of some database game of +1 like and +1 follower. I just wanted to create some new weird language or at least capture some of the existing language to get people into a metacognitive understanding about what was going on online and how they could even govern the self. Of course, I read a lot of Tao Te Ching, so part of it's about governing the self, part of it's about governing a group. But on the other hand, being able to present that self in everyday life. There's Irving Goffman's presentation of self in everyday life. There's also presentation of self in digital life. There's instas and finstas, the thing you present to yourself virtually that looks like an influencer is very fancy, and then the real one behind the scenes that you share with your friends. Early on, there was an anime called Serial Experiments Lane, which was made by some people who used to work at Apple. They actually talked about here's this girl who's, I think, about 14 years old with some mousy hair. She's extremely shy, and yet she becomes bigger online than she is in real life. And so this was really
Yeah,
interesting to look at that. And then this term that I found called hyper-sigil, which is this idea that you can make something outside of yourself, and that extended identity can then manage and influence your primary identity. So this is
for
the
sure.
idea of where this came from. And
Yeah.
one more thing that maybe you could put at the beginning is the term wiki actually comes from a Hawaiian term for quick. There's a
Mm,
wiki shuttle at the airport that Ward Cunningham was at in Hawaii, and it says
mhm.
the wiki shuttle, the quick shuttle. So he named the software Wiki for quick. And I think it's
That's
just a
fun.
nice little tidbit of it is pretty quick once you get used to it.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess as we're talking about these elements of, especially with the way that you were framing it with the, enhanced, say, cyborg elements. And I guess like leading into this general conversation where, we want to explore the future of governance, it'd be interesting to hear what some thoughts are on your side of how you see different technologies that are already coming up, whether AI or otherwise, that can make us effectively enhanced participants in governance systems, and how that can be, I guess, start with the beneficial side, and maybe we'll touch on some of the not so beneficial or scary sides later in the conversation.
I think everyone likes to quote Marshall McLuhan, the idea of like every affordance has like a taking away on the other side, that there's almost like a law of conservation of effort and affordance. And there is a sense of, why I tried to make this game called DAO Game, um, was that I noticed that people would participate in DAOs and they would be very excited at the beginning. Let's make a DAO, almost like let's make a new band. And then once you have to deal with the press and booking your tours and practicing, a lot of those same people who were so excited at the beginning, they're like, I don't really want to do this anymore. This is actual work. And so there's that dopamine that's associated with the genesis of an idea that's separate from the doing of the idea. And so what I noticed in DAOs as I started to get really heavily into DAOs like Dinner DAO and things that had real money involved, and interviewing people who did Constitution DAO, is that almost pre-testing what you do before you do it can really help. I was very inspired by some of the simulation tools that you would use to do circuits, like Spice from 1974 that someone showed me. The idea is that it's very expensive to build a circuit board in real life, so why don't you have a simulation of what's going to happen first so you can have a run through of it? Then you can decide whether that would be the circuit board to implement. So with DAOs and DAO Game, which I made in one night, I was staying up really, really late at a friend's house. They were moving out. They said, come over for Complexity Weekend, which is an online conference in the England time zone. So we're staying up really late. And then I was so excited about all of the ideas that I was seeing and the fact that Peter Murrell was there. I actually got to meet him for the first time. I was so excited. We had eaten really good food and they put me up in this room that's completely empty except for a salt lamp. There's nothing in the room at all. And I brought almost nothing with me because I'm just staying at their house a night before they move. And so I'm inspired, and whenever I have any free time, I always want to make a game. It's very hard for me to play board games because I get jealous of the people that made them and I want to make them myself. So I always turn jealousy into creativity. And it's very rare that I'm jealous. I'm not jealous. Like if somebody says, I went on a great vacation, I'm like, that's cool. But if somebody says, I made Magic the Gathering, I would be like, oh, I want to make that. And because I know you, now I'll be more likely to be able to make a successful game. Success for
Yeah.
me is not money. It's about getting people in a room to be delighted or change how they experience the world. So early on when I was doing a software company, I made my own custom Sellers of Catan game out of craft store parts. It was fully articulated grass and sheep and wood and all of these little things. We would play this a lot. But I wanted to make a new game. And so DAO Game was, let's have blank cards that are laminated. Let's be able to draw our ideas, start the DAO, have your governance tokens represent it really, really fast, and let's make it a party game. So it's even better if people are at a party, if they are on
Yes.
some psychedelic, if they're drunk, if they're stoned, whatever party things people do. Oftentimes there's a big group house and people are all into crypto, so it's very easy to run. The idea is just to get people together to experience that joy at the beginning, and then just like real life, you can see the fall offs. That person's in the bathroom, that person left the party. They have voting tokens. How do we get that to happen? We even have challenge cards where it says somebody lost their private keys. So it was all about trying to get people to experience what it was actually like over 6 months to 2 years in a very compressed space of maybe 45 minutes to 2 hours.
I was actually about to ask, okay, so how long are your games usually? 45 minutes to 2 hours, I think it's reasonable. But, I'm just thinking in order for a game to be as close to reality as possible, it has to go overnight and, a weekend preferably. So, you run into maybe some conflicts, some, I don't know, disagreements, and you have to solve all of that. Have you had any of, interesting cases where the game went, in completely different direction, which you didn't expect it?
No, oddly, every single time it's been played, the same thing has happened again and again and again, no matter who the people are and what their backgrounds are. So I can take someone who's never been part of a DAO. I can take people who have been part of a co-op. I can take super creative people and super uncreative people. At the end of the game, they all say the same thing. Wow, it was exciting in the beginning and boring at the end. Oh my gosh, it got really hard to get people to care and vote.
Welcome to the world of governance, right?
Yes.
And Do you think that every DAO, every like online community should do some sort of stress testing as a game before they actually launch a DAO? So what
Absolutely.
are those? Yeah. Does it actually like it's just 2 hours is enough to kind of bring people back to reality to sober up and be like it's actually not as easy as it may sound.
Absolutely, yeah. 2 hours is definitely sufficient because 45 minutes in, you can already see what's going to happen. Um, Governance is a marathon. It's difficult, and I love Eric Olson's paper, pre-conflict as governance. You wanna pre-conflict and get things out. Um, uh, Kirsten McLean, who's, Master Chief in the Coast Guard and Zargum's partner, who, I lived in the group house with Zargum and everybody for a long time. I would always interview her about, "You're running the Leadership Academy, what are you seeing?" And there is a whole method that they use to conflict, and there's a training academy that's, 2 weeks long, where you go through this, and you also go through something very important. Doesn't matter if it's analog or digital, you really need to do it on paper first, is memos. So every governance proposal is also a memo. So I didn't want to go into DAOs or governance without experience. So thankfully, I had experience being, I think, the second youngest board member of any college in the United States. When I was, I guess, like 26 or 27, I managed I think it was like $350 million endowment or something ridiculous. I served on the board for 3 years with old money people, learned a lot, and, tried to make the best decisions I could with the information that I had. But I noticed a lot of different things. I mean, I noticed first off that governance doesn't happen on paper. The record of governance, the record on the blockchain is a representative in your spreadsheet of all of the tiny things that went on behind the scenes, and the people that are able to write effective proposals, that are clear, that tell people what to do and gather that information are going to do well. Also, behind the scenes on the phone tree, you might get a call at midnight, "Hey, we're gonna vote this way," right? And it depends on who your allegiances are. You can have a board of 20 people, and 10 of those people think that they're actually voting, but the other 10 have talked about what they're going to do behind the scenes for the last 6 months, and they're all working in unison. So you can have different levels of understanding and information, and I see this on a lot of boards actually, and I've started to interview, people on larger boards and, more exclusive boards that you can have your token hires on a board that feel like they're participating, but they're not actually part of the governance because the governance done at a country club. So if you get invited to the country club, congratulations, now you can be part of governance. Or if you're really good at oration and public speaking, like I trained to do, I can be the last one talking and sway the vote. And so it's a completely strange thing. So I think there's a lot to be learned from governance systems that have existed for a long time, whether that's a co-op, grocery store, sororities, fraternities, a 50-year-long hobby train club, a chrysanthemums club, Toastmasters for speaking, competitive speech and debate. There's so many different systems that can be analog or digital. It doesn't really matter if it's digital, but you do need to have a quick way of calling everybody up. So, the stereotype of like Lyndon Johnson, one of the presidents of the United States, having so many phones everywhere is important because you do need to have a fast way of getting in touch. And a lot of times it's a phone. It's not like, "Oh, this person's in Venezuela on this, yoga retreat finding themselves." Well, this vote that you've set up to close within 24 hours is within the window of their silent retreat that's tech free. Well, you should have figured that out earlier. Well, that means that you need to be closer to the people that you're voting with. So it's a strange thing. I made this talk called "How to 8 Ways to Hack a DAO," which is that it's really easy to hack them because most people don't have governance experience and they're not super resilient because that's a hard training to be metacognitive as well as voting. And what is it? Law is reason free from passion or whatever the quote from Legally Blonde. But I think it is really about that. how do you have a community? And I think for a lot of things, like looking at ultimate frisbee, for instance, or sororities, fraternities, you have rushes, you have fun, silly events in which governance is done with pizza, and you have incentives to do governance, and a lot of it's in real life. And so the governance is really shifted into these rituals. And it's the same, going out to Eastern Oregon and talking with tribes out there, like, how is your governance done? Well, we take 3 years to do this, and you have to be this in the community. It's not like join our Slack channel and we'll upgrade you to this thing within 2 weeks. It's watch how somebody participates long term and see if they're stable, and then slowly wrap them into the community as they're proving themselves. You can ask GPT about this a lot. Like, what are some of the hidden aspects of country clubs that people don't talk about? Because there's the overt idea of joining the country club, and then there's the covert idea of joining the country club, which is join and don't sit at a table, sit at the bar. Someone has to tap you for membership, of course, right? You have to be a trusted member of the community, or two people have to vouch you, which I'm seeing a lot of co-living spaces start to do. And then you've got the someone will give you a piece of juicy information, but not too juicy. And that is basically your stain test for cell. Like when you're when you're doing like a cell sample, you're putting a stain to see where it goes in your body. Basically, this is their stain test. So it's here's a little bit of juicy information, but it's not too juicy. Let's see where it goes. They want to see first if you spread it. Two, where does it go? Who are you connected to? And then doing an analog stain test to see who you're connected to in the community. Now, if you go into lower class members of the community, older members of the community, those in bad standing, those in good standing, that's one thing. But two, if you don't share that info, they'll trust you with more and more pieces of information. And a lot of it's longevity. Have you been in the club for 20 years? You know, you shouldn't come in wearing a Rolex on your first day, even if you have one. You should be demure, right? Because you're signaling that you're willing to be part of a collective and participate over time and work within those rules, right? So now there are all sorts of people like, we're going to make everything from scratch. Let's not study the past. It's like, all of the past is the same. It's all the same stuff. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican or Democrat. It's all about humans and how they work, and we are collective creatures. So there are structures that are very slow moving structures for a reason, and I am finding a lot of people from scratch who are governance scholars who are first not studying country clubs and sororities, and two, rediscovering all the things that work. Not to dig on anybody, this stuff is exciting. It's just there's oftentimes these kind of classic things that don't change. And as an anthropologist, I don't care who's doing it, what group it is. I want to know, is there some general principles that are the same no matter what community you're part of as a human thing? And then can we also look at animals? you know, is there some general framework that works? And is of course why, me and everybody else loves, Eleanor Ostrom and graduated distinctions and all of these things, because you're really looking at like cybernetics, and you're really looking at governance, and you're looking at economics. And she's such a silly, fun person, or was, that you can really see how excited she is about it, and how fun it is for her. There was a conference, the Eleanor Ostrom conference, that I went to last year, and the librarians got really excited. They said, come to the basement of the library. We have like, 27 of her, however many boxes, 500 boxes. We found some cool stuff. So I read her paper that she wrote, I think she was 9 years old, about water and water rights. And it just went like this: another cool thing about water and how people deal with water, and another cool thing about water. And it's super articulate. She's just nerding out about water. And I just love seeing that, because there are a lot of people in many communities. There's some big person that's done a thing, and then they're like, I'm going to riff off of this thing. I'm like, no, what do you think? Well, this person said, no, what do you actually think? Are you playing with the substrate? Are you being silly? Are you exploring and discovering? Is that, serotonin, dopamine center attached to being on the frontier? Or are you just LARPing as somebody else because it's too scary to go out on your own? And that's not to say everybody should do that. It's just a lot of this is asking the right questions, you know? Why do we have DAOs? Also, where did the term DAO come from? Most people are like, I love AI. I'm like, where did the term AI come from? Where did the term DAO come from? And, you know, the term DAO came from a paper on home automation about a decentralized autonomous organization in the home where the home knows to turn on and off the lights. It's basically digitizing what used to be done by servants in castles. Turn on and off the lights, blow out the candles, close and open the curtains, like, turn on and off your HVAC system, open the doors, get your air in there. So it's a really interesting thing to see that it was actually about this, and that in the speech that I gave, it was, you know, it's not decentralized. You often know who it is. It's not organized. It's often a disorganization, and it's not autonomous in that it's extremely manual labor. But it's really cool to think about. I just think that it can hurt people really hard if there is a token of value associated, and therefore a simulation can really help people understand the substance of what it is before you actually commit to doing it. Because the amount of conflicts that I've seen in these that have to be arbitrated can really tear people apart worse than a game of Risk, you know? Even in Risk, you can have people upset with each other. Um, so to me, it's really interested um, to me, it's very interesting to look at the meta around these things and to try to zoom out and ask origin stories, examples in analog, and then, you know, what parts are stated and what parts are not.
It seems like from what you mentioned in Web3 governance, I can't help but think we're just replicating the same things, problems, principles, just like we often pretend that it's something new. Some problems that are just very specific to Web3. Some of them might be, but generally, I feel like at the end of the day, we were humans. So we bound to repeat certain mistakes or patterns of behavior. And I wanted to also follow on, the existing kind of design structure. So earlier in the season, we had Angela Walsh and her research basically highlighted the roles that we will play, often unconsciously. Obviously, we're all like members of society, partners, brothers, sisters, contributors, etc., etc. But it was very interesting that when we are trying to also communicate with others, often those roles we're assuming it's not a conscious choice. So my question is, a year ago, you've mentioned in your presentation that design is governance, and every design choice shapes how people behave. And from what you've mentioned about those just rounds of, I don't know how else to call it, but like initiation ceremonies, of you had to be vouched by several people, and all of that. So it is a design, it is a choice. In order to be in a specific room or at the table, you have to conform to certain rules, accept the rules of the game. So how should we think about governance processes, where so many of our daily interactions are mediated by design choices rather than explicit rules? I don't think anybody will tell you that this is the like written rules that you have to be at the bar at midnight, etc., etc. But you learn through, just communication, something very informal, very often not even written because you don't want any trace of that evidence. So to people who are so completely outside of governance world, crypto world, mm, it sends rather pessimistic note. Like if you're not part of the club, it will be very hard for you to get in. Do you agree with that opinion? Do you see any problems maybe with this reality, or is it just something that, well, it is a fact and you can either deny it or deal with it? I'm just telling you how it is.
Yeah, mostly it's just I'm telling you how it is because there's this sense we have this and it's in a sense this is what it used to be called. It used to be called nerd fallacy. Let's make sure we have everybody in this community. Even if someone's really disruptive, they should be here. Or there's this idea of inclusivity. Inclusivity and inclusive design, the definition I like of it is, you know, just in the United States, 21 million people have some sort of temporary, permanent, or situational disability, like you can't hear because you're in a loud airport, or you only have one hand because you have a kid in one hand, or you don't have an arm, right? It's some temporary, situational, and permanent. But the idea of inclusive design that I like from like a calm technology perspective is that you don't need to be super awake to use your home automation system. It's just a light switch that you can slap on the wall because you don't see it because it's dark, so temporary blindness. There's raised bumps on the buttons on the back of the TV so you can feel and touch. You don't have to, turn your phone light on and turn the TV around to touch it, right? So it's the same thing with governance. It needs to be, if you have a huge long running group, wait, the Chrysanthemum Club, there's no one that comes into the group and says, like, I can't stand that we're using this type of chrysanthemum. We need to use this other type of chrysanthemum. Everybody should use that. Somehow those people either don't show up in the groups or the group, because it's so long and so boring or something, really resists those kinds of people. You've seen this in software where it's like, well, we need to use this piece of software or blah, 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 blah. Those groups to me are very much like the article that I wrote on design as governance, which goes like this. I'm sitting there in a coffee shop in LA. All of the tables are put in a way that have no outlets associated with it. The Wi-Fi password is in the back in a way that no one can see. And now the barista has to tell the Wi-Fi password in addition to doing their job. And eventually everyone gets really mad. This cafe was supposed to be for relaxing, yet everyone's in here on laptops. Obviously, the owner of the cafe didn't want it to be used for laptops, but this is going to make them the most money, and we all mutiny and we put the tables where they need to be. And thankfully, the tables are movable. And the analogy that I wanted to make in that as design as governance is many people from the top down make either a governance shape or a system or a restaurant in which all of the tables and chairs are put on the ground, and this is the only way you can use it. And that system, while it works for some cases, like McDonald's, for instance, it doesn't work well for many other spaces. So you can't do that in a country club, for instance, because you need to be able to have a gala and a wedding and your fundraiser and all the other things that you do. But a country club is a DAO. As much as we don't want to say that, it's one of the best examples of a DAO. Now, you could say everyone is welcome to this DAO, and then you let everybody in, and then you need everybody's phone number. You need somebody's on Telegram, somebody's on WhatsApp, somebody's on Discord, somebody's on Slack, somebody's on Blue Sky, somebody's on, MAGA Social. Somebody, it's like, what? Where are they? And it's super decentralized. It's not that the people are decentralized, it's that their communication methods are decentralized. And it's very difficult. So, um, look at, how a country club, for instance, like handles funds and treasury over time. Now, is it inclusive? No, it is exclusive. Are DAOs inclusive or exclusive? Well, you kind of need to know what a DAO is. Like, it's just the term is very strange. Is it, all the group houses that I know that say they're inclusive group houses, we're inclusive as long as you check these boxes. So we're inclusive as long as you say the word inclusive. It's not, and that sounds like a dig. It's not. It's more like if you have this particular kind of upper middle class speech, you can join this group. Or if you are part of this workhouse because you're a field laborer, then you can have this bed for 8 hours, and the minute you get up, somebody else is going to take that bed because we have a trailer and we're going to put 15 people in it. So we're going to have shifts. Now that system has a pressure on it, time pressure, and there's governance inherently associated in that system, right? So it's a hard thing to really articulate, I think I got the design as governance part, but it's really hard to get people to understand this as a continuum, instead of it being disjointed. Well, because it's not on blockchain, because it's not part of an official DAO, it can't possibly be digital governance, but it's all governance. And when one group makes decisions for another, that's design as governance. When you're building the system yourself, there's design as governance. And I think we need to really look at entropy. I don't know if you've read this, the idea of into the cool and Gaia theory. Of course, we have to call it a different name because Gaia doesn't make sense. But the idea of the second law of thermodynamics, that everything goes into the cool. So you have the sun on a planet and there's no atmosphere, it dissipates really fast. Or it's really hot or really cold, but it's whereas with Earth you have the trees and the canopy in the Amazon in the Amazon 50 years ago that has this cloud forest, and in South America you have this beautiful cloud forest, and it's a gradient softener. It takes the gradient, that sharp gradient of the sun, and um, diffuses it in a way that that energy can be changed in different sources. So the idea is, humans and trees and all these things came about as gradient softeners as a way of like reducing that thought law of thermodynamics where everything goes into the cool. They're just making it slower for energy to go into the cool. So I think of things
Yeah.
as people are trying to do things like live in a group house, and they're naturally going into entropy and making things messy. And so really good governance model incentivizes people to reduce that entropy and to do nice things like clean the dishes or care for the space, or those rituals about saving a little bit of money in a community pot that trusted members can then use to do group activities. These are all, OG DAOs, and
Yeah.
they're really interesting.
And I wanted to kind of double click on a point that you're bringing up there, in terms of this element of the realities of inclusion or exclusion, and kind of the importance of, just factoring that in, factoring conflict in, right? Of not treating these things as unwanted things or like the taboo topics that we shouldn't talk about. But, I kind of like framing it when I talk to people about community that if you don't set some kind of boundary on who your community is meant to serve, then you're probably not serving anyone because you can't be everything to everybody. And so it's just going to be a lot of disappointment for a lot of people. And so I guess when taking that kind of design angle into thinking about governance, how do you recommend that people handle these tensions, because it's not easy to say of like, hey, oh, I want to be exclusive, right? Most of us don't start off with that premise when starting community, but by being inclusive to a very clearly defined set of people, you're inherently being exclusive to those who are not part of that clearly defined set. So yeah, I guess just what are your personal recommendations, whether from the anthropological lens or the design lens? But it's just an emotionally not comfortable thing for a lot of people to go through, especially if it's your first time being responsible for designing and building a community. Yeah, any kind of recommendations there?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to even use the words inclusive and exclusive. I don't ever use them because they're heated. And, words are
Sure.
aesthetics, and aesthetics is the realm of causality. So if you use different words or just don't use them, there's a lot of people, so there's some really, I would just call them uptight group houses where like I would try to apply to this group house in Portland or even like a bar, and I would come in and it was very obvious that I didn't have the freedom to just chill. Like in Europe, it's like you can chill on the side of the street and drink. I don't drink very much, but it's nice. And then maybe you could sit on the base of a statue and you can be in a plaza. And if you're really untoward, you're gonna get in trouble. But there's an idea that, you guys are adults and we don't need to put a railing up with a giant sign that says, don't go over the railing. You could fall in. There's a lawsuit. So it's a very different, there's this kind of collective understanding that you're going to behave. And because of that, you also have a lot of fun and freedom. Whereas I've seen these very stressful places where it comes in and it's like, here's your chore wheel and you need to do this and da da da. And it's like, but I haven't even gotten here. You're assuming I'm a bad actor just because I've walked in. Whereas all the testing is very simple. Hey, let me watch you clean some dishes. Let me see your technique. Oh, okay. And you hang out with them for a day or two and you see if they naturally make things more entropic or if they make things less entropic. Do they clean up after themselves? Do they have good manners? It's not just do they take off the shoes when they come in. It's, I know someone that, we were in a group
Which many
house.
Americans don't. I have personal battle. I come from Russia. We always take off shoes,
Yeah.
and all my European friends hate me for that.
Yeah. And it's just about, if yeah, it's a whole thing, but it's really about seeing if someone is thinking outside of themselves in a considerate space, and if they've been raised to improve the environment. Now, that doesn't mean people can't be trained, but just watch natively how someone is doing things, because you might find someone that's super messy and negative and making the space bad. And there's people that come in and very quietly do the very small labor of organizing things or making things nicer. And so for me, the community test is never about someone's ideology. It's about how they act. They can say, "Oh, I agree with this, and let's make this beautiful thing in utopia," meh, and they, order online delivery and leave the boxes everywhere, and the food rots, and they leave their towels, and they don't do laundry, and they've never done laundry because they've been in a house where they've been coddled so much that all they can think about is ideology because they've lived in an abstract sphere and they've never touched anything for real, and they've definitely never lived in a food service environment, yet they're all about the lower class and helping them lift up while they're actively taking resources away from the lower income people in the community that are actually doing the labor. I don't like that. It's very obvious for me to see when somebody walks in because they talk more than they do. Now, I made a 60-point system to understand whether to invite people to my weirdo conference, which is like, they're
Is there like a
playful.
scoring system?
Yeah, it's a scoring system. It
Is
also,
there a minimum to get in?
yeah,
Well, how do you guys is there like a preset of like okay. I love how basically, you were explaining something that is not really quantifiable. It's like more relating to vibes, energy, but then you also turn it into something quantifiable. Like, could you please explain to me how you do that? How do you calculate those scores?
sure, it's really easy. It's, watch people come over to a group house, and if they're such bad guests that, they send my friend to the hospital, because he has a difficult immune system and weird stuff, weird entropy and trash and stuff can do that, then, find out what they're doing versus somebody else, Someone else might stay at the house for a month or 2, and we forget that they're there, or they're just so awesome that they blend into the house. Or there's somebody who overstays their welcome, assumes that, while they have COVID, they can use everybody's neti pots and, that they are entitled to the car and that they don't have to ever pay rent and, that they keep saying, "No, I don't have any money. Like, can I have this?" Or they eat all the food. It's pretty obvious once you live with someone for a while. Or, you have one of my friends who, when he was at the group house at Harvard, he brought an entire kit of stuff to clean with. And he said, it's so nice, he just sat in the corner during the party and did the dishes, and the sink was always spotless. That has such a huge effect on how we experience a space because all of those things are peripheral attention, and that peripheral attention really matters. So I have this thing. Now a lot of people might say, like, that's terrible. How could you do that? But in reality, it's like I would prefer not, to have my friend not go to the hospital because he, might not have, he's super kind. And that's what makes it such a great group house. But sometimes people might overstay their welcome. And it's really hard to tell them no. And that, it's not that, you want to do that on the way in. You just want to see over time. This stuff has to be soft because if you assume everyone's going to be a bad actor, all of the good ones feel terrible and all the bad ones aren't really changed. But you can kind of see over time, like, what does it feel like, um, to be in a place with someone? You can also have, we have some friends that are super messy, but man, are they and I'm messy too, but so I figure out how to do that within a house and when to leave, and how to do that. But then, I find like I say cool things and people like having me around, even if I'm a little bit messy. So maybe I should always show up with someone who's an anti-entropy system so that it's a net neutral on the environment of that peripheral chaos. So I think there's a lot of it is just being outside of yourself and being really good, or a space, like the crypto commons gathering in Vienna, the commons hub. That was an amazing space because um there's loud music that gets played on a record, so it's like really good sound, and we all clean certain time of the week. And then everything's really sorted so that the people who are on ships to make the food, but we're all doing this at the same time. And I'm practicing de-entropizing a place, so I ended up just completely sorting the bookshelf and putting nice things together, which I've never done before. And that was my task, and I spent like 2 hours doing it. And the conversations that we had in that beautiful space afterwards were totally different than when it was chaos. So it is really interesting to see the cause and effect. And, I would really like to give you an example of, of some of these things that I wrote, because it's really the nuanced stuff that then creates when you put a bunch of these people in a room. You can have one person that's kind of like annoying, and the conference can sustain that one person and kind of help them understand. Or like I said before, watched how somebody washes a dish. There's like a really cool way of doing it. If have have your laundry machines in your group house, have two extra and have them in the kitchen. Have your rags, that anybody can contribute to for your clothes pile, that you don't want anymore. Cut them up. Have your nice dish soap and use rags to clean most of your stuff. It's so easy to clean. You don't have to worry about sponges, and then you just launder them at the end of every shift. Then suddenly you have a huge pile of stuff, and it works really well. Those are like little tiny things, but you're not going through like paper towels and all these things. You're actually using less water and less resources when you add it all together. But some people have never been trained to clean a dish. So what you need to do is figure out people's normal entropy systems and teach them in a supportive environment the stuff that they didn't learn when they were kids. And do it in a way that doesn't say you need to do this. Make it system two, system one, system two type thinking. Make it the systemic thing where it's like almost as simple as air. You just find yourself doing it, and when everybody does that, you have a better space. Now that's hard to, it's hard to do because you can pick some people, but yeah. So I have this little system right here. Um, there's an overall score for whether they're additive or draining, tolerable in short bursts, and dangerous. um and, a lot of it is riffing and exploring or not. That's the first variable. So when you're talking with somebody, do they riff on it and they're like, "Yeah, Sam, that's cool," and you kind of have a fun time? Or do they say, "Well, that hasn't been quoted in the literature, therefore." And that comes down to that scene, Good Will Hunting, where, the guy comes in the bar and he's starting to, quote Wood and Johnson, page 172, and Matt Damon's like, are you gonna plagiarize the rest of the book, or you have an original thought of your own? And the guy is like, well, no, 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 and quotes more. And then he's like, well, I'm gonna, take my kids to skiing, and you're gonna be serving up McDonald's. And Matt Damon's like, yeah, well, at least I won't be on original, but if you want, we could take it outside. And he's like, the whole number scene with apples. But the whole thing about that is like, it's, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are nerds. They made a movie that is something that you encounter a lot. And there are a bunch of people that say, oh wow, that person memorized something, that must be smart. But then you see who's win the Nobel Prize, and it's always these doofy doofballs, when you really talk to them. And I've gotten to talk to a bunch of them. They're doofy doofballs. They're great. They are not afraid of asking the question or moving the thing forward, especially when nobody cares, and they work on it. And then a lot of them are like, oh man, the prize actually sucked. I get a call early in the morning, and now I can't just go and nerd out with like 12 kids from a school. They got to put me in front of an auditorium to talk about a subject that most kids don't care about, instead of meeting with the 12 kids that could care. So a lot of that, Richard Feynman especially, winning the Nobel Prize in physics, it's this idea of, now this prize has been conferred to you by Alfred Nobel, who is a snarky snarker himself, who, didn't give any of his money to his family, but I think he put the Peace Prize in Norway, and then had the rest of them in Sweden, because Sweden and Norway were fighting at the time. So it was a way of forcing them to deal. I mean, there's just all sorts of pranks that he put into this prize, so that he could reward, not people who are Machiavellian and really good at looking like they did something, but the people who are actually doing the thing behind the scenes. And I think, this list is very similar to like how you would identify those people behind the scenes that might be a bit more laureate worthy, because it's the dynamic riffing. I have an entropy column. There's a lot of options per column, and I have it in Notion, and I color code it, and so you can look at it and you can look at the average color, and then that averages out to see whether it's like green or red. And so if it's more green, then it's going to be better. And if it's more red, it's going to be harder. It's all red, it's dangerous. So it's a calm tech guide. But so there's entropy reducer, um, a creator, an external reducer, a creator internal, make their life easier, make their life more complex, drains resources from others, and this one's really long, and drains resources from others and overstays their welcome. So all of them are based on real people that have come through all the group houses I've lived at. Um, the category, you can have a creator, a consumer, or you can have a repeater, someone who just repeats a paper but has no opinion on it. And they look smart because they've linked to a paper. That's kind of dangerous. You have to call them out and they really don't like it. Like I had some people at a conference and this has happened sometimes where I didn't check and it wasn't that they weren't smart. It's just that they took longer to do things and they weren't used to coming up with a thought. It's like when you have people play with a pile of Legos. I will always have people join. I had a startup some time ago and new team members. I would just walk around the office and then I would linger just a little bit at the Lego table. We always had a Lego table. And then if I saw them gravitating towards it and just started building things, that was one of the check boxes. It was all I didn't care about resume. I didn't care if you finished high school. I cared about, if we're in line at a store, tell me about like how this could be better and easier. That would be a good manager. If it's a Lego person and they like making something and they finish it, they're gonna be um really good. If somebody says, I only care about this new code base that came out, I would remove them from the company within like a week or two. I would get them their dream job at the company that only wrote in that language. And they'd be like, you removed our best Android developer. And I'd be like, yeah, but he wasn't interested in making apps for people. He's interested in exploring this particular language. That's a different type of person. He can go and make that language better, but we're making stuff for people and we have 5 million people using our stuff. So we really need to make sure that we're more civil servants. We're making a sanitation system. If you want to be part of the experimental department that does waste treatment, yes, please. But we actually need to make sure that we're pushing crap through these toilets and sanitizing it so that people don't die of, terrible diseases. So these are some of the things is like attention commitment is a column, requires continuous attention and effort.
Now,
Please.
everybody who ever been over at Medical House suddenly feels self-conscious,
Well,
myself included.
that's why I love MetaGov House because a lot of the people that kind of self-select for the MetaGov Slack, um, it's awesome. Like, I love MetaGov people. Like, that's why I love going to the house. Like, there is a lot of magical stuff. A lot of MetaGov people play well by themselves, but if they don't, they're riffing and enjoying life and having fun. And also, like, people do pitch in and do the entropy, or they create, or there's like shakshuka. There's stuff going on. But I think it's one of the best places at East Denver. I also like how I got into MetaGov. I was at the decentralized web camp a long time ago, which I got into because I gave that talk on 8 ways to hack a DAO and then said I had this DAO game. And then I think Cent was like, hey, come to this thing. I got a little bit of sponsorship to come in. And then I saw the MetaGov sweatshirts and I wanted one. And I think Josh was like, these are for members. And I was like, how do I sign up? And I hung out for like the whole time at MetaGov because I wanted a sweatshirt. So for me, I'm very like swag oriented. I'm basically a dog. So I want to be like I will behave, I will do tricks, whatever you need me to do. I want a sweatshirt. And I treasure that sweatshirt. Well, hilariously, then I got really into the community because of this sweatshirt that had great vibes. So, I think, there's also like I just want to go through a couple of these and then, you can cut whatever you want. Like, humor playful score, positive energy humor default, self-deprecating. There's a lot of people who are really funny, but they're inherently really depressed and they might be self-deprecating. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have them around. That's not a negative, but also that you should, really hug them so they're okay, right? Like a lot of these tell you about their own cybernetic methods. Some people never have any Slack in their lives, not the software, but they don't have any Slack, so they're always like, "Oh, I'm always overwhelmed." It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It's just that it's really hard for them to make boundaries, and they are really smart. And so sometimes, those type of people, you need to have some sort of intervention. Intervention looks like having something nice with people to de-stress them. You have to find out how they de-stress. There's social awareness, there's socially neuroatypical and aware, which is fun. There's socially incompetent and unaware, which is difficult. One person who was like in his 80s at Cyborg Camp one year, which is the little conference I run, we had to fight with him, and we had like two other 80-year-olds and a couple other people like upgrade his understanding of what he was saying, and we had him be quiet instead of interrupting everybody for a couple of sessions, and it was awesome. Like, we tag teamed in this beautiful way, and we got him into a shape where he's also like a famous inventor of a very important piece of software, so it's really hard for him to like have people be like, stop, you might not know everything, let's find out. And thankfully my mentor was there, who's like 84, and he was kind of helping this process too. And so it's a lot of work to do that sometimes. So there's like extremely socially aware and terrified of everything, like overthinking. That's me. And then there's Machiavellian, where they're like, they understand the entire system and exactly how they're going to do things. I try to make Machiavellian type of people try to come to this conference every year. And so I have to filter that out very quickly, or, they might show up and then use the information inside the conference to give bad advice to governments or something. And all these things have happened before. There are people around whom you forget about your phone, which is a very specific one. It's get inspired, want to be on your phone because you're bored, get inspired to take notes on your phone, want to warn others about, want to be outside or pay attention to, um, get inspired to take notes on paper and make things out of clay around. I mean, these are very nuanced things, but they're all very, like relational style: anxious, insecure, secure, anxious, avoidant, insecure, self-centered, avoidant, anxious, paranoid.
But you're talking about like establishing and reinforcing certain like social norms, and I very much agree with you. It's like when you see, for example, hackathon end, and some people are more keen to help out to clean up the space, others just don't. And I was always thinking to myself, like, I noticed those things, but I was thinking just because I was brought up by a Slavic mom, which is basically when you check out of a hotel room, you have to make sure that the bed is made and everything is like, I was like, it's probably just my setup that is a bit weird.
Yes.
But
And
Can
also,
confirm, not
yeah,
not
also
unique to.
when you interview hotel staff, you say, "Do you want me to make my bed upon checkout?" "No, I want you to strip the bed or just leave it, because if you make
mm,
the bed and it's perfect, it looks like you didn't sleep in it, and we don't know, and so it actually takes us longer to deconstruct the bed, and we're, like, quizzing ourselves." "Oh, no."
okay, now I know. I've never actually.
Yeah, and
Okay.
you got a handheld antibacterial steamer, and you're gonna sort that bed perfectly and clean those sheets and put it back on. Because sometimes, like, if I wanna be a really good house guest, I will clean my own sheets at a low temperature, and I'll, like, put them back on the bed, which is just completely crazy. But then there are some people, like, who's like, "Hey, didn't tell me this, but, like, likes order, and I should have known that, but I was only, like, 17 or something." Never told me, but it was like the idea maybe like 10 years later, "Hey, when you're sharing my house and you're sleeping in this bed, you know, put the sheets back on the bed when you're out of the bed immediately in the morning, so I don't have to deal with looking at your entropy." When you say make yourself at home, it's like make yourself at home to the level that the home surrounding is at, So, and now I have a guest bed in the living room, and actually, when guests stay over and they do make the bed after they get up, oh, it's so nice in that living room, right? So it's interesting because if they had their own room and there was a closed door, whatever you want, I don't care, you know. But because I can see it now, I'm noticing like actually, and so it's totally different for different people. But
Do you have this feeling, a case that it's just my personal pain? And I sorry, Eugene. I have a feeling, and now I'm noticing a more positive trend and changing that. But when you were saying all those examples, maybe again, it's just the surrounding I come from. It's usually women who enforce those rules, or like, okay, let's organize, or let's clean up, or let's it's time to bed, or like those things like that. And um I don't know, maybe it's like problem of the maybe community I was in. Now I'm seeing more trends where it actually doesn't matter, and regardless of gender, some people are more keen to help, others are not. But I'm just curious, do you have any observations in that regard?
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to bring up the book The Phoenix Project, which is about kind of an IT disaster that this guy who got promoted to VP uh had to deal with within 4 days of, is a total mess. And it doesn't matter necessarily what gender it is. You might say like system administrators at a company are always slung with a specific type of work, or like women are associated with whatever gender it is, it doesn't totally matter. It's that there are sometimes labor that gets stuck in a specific individual because they're good at it. Like when I come home um, to my mom's house, there was an expectation for years because I was doing system administrator and because I was working at a computer repair shop that I would maintain these machines. Um, but then I realized, and the Phoenix Project book is really good about, they identified the bottleneck in the organization, and they had the IT guy that was the guy that everybody gave their problems to. They had him go on vacation for a week, and he cried. Um, it was because every time you sent a problem to him, you were training him to be good at that problem, and nobody else got to learn. Now, everybody else could, over the last 2, 3, 4 years, become pretty good at it, and everybody could have been smarter in the organization. They're actually not making themselves so smart. Now, we can talk about AI. If you give the problem to AI, you're not making yourself as smart either, but that's an exercise of the reader, and there are certain ways to use it and certain ways not to use it. But what was really interesting to see is that, I would watch my dad do this, and it's like, "Oh, I don't know how to use this washer dryer." I'm like, "Bitch, you can build a synthesizer from scratch, and I've had to be your lab tech to do all the soldering." Like,
You
that
can do
is
it.
some smart stuff that you're doing
Just
right
do it.
here. Now it's really hard to
Yes, I'm very, very sorry. We do have 10 minutes, and you told us that you're gonna leave 5 minutes
Mhm,
before.
yeah.
I really want to ask you one question on AI, and we have a quiz.
Okay.
Shall we do it? Because we
Sure.
can't really let it go without a quiz and asking you about Comtech and AI.
Okay.
Okay, I apologize. I wish we didn't have to stop. Okay. Okay, sorry. Um, you're founder of Comtech Institute and, from what I can gather from the website, is dedicated to redefining technology that enhance human life without causing stress and distraction. And one of the principles is use the minimum tech needed to solve the problem. And it's very interesting because I feel like currently everything relating to governance or not, whatever you want to do, there's an AI tool that can make it faster, more efficient, whatever, whatever. And we discussed with previous guests that there's just more tools than actually, things to solve and problems to solve. So, could you very quickly maybe give us a little bit of your insights on this, the trend that everything becomes more efficient and AI driven, and your approach for minimizing technology or not using it when you actually don't have to?
Sure. So Mark Weiser, talking about Calm Tech in 1995, talked about a future in which there would be pads, tabs, and boards. So there'd be these big boards that would give you situational awareness, and then you have these little pads and tabs. You could give these tablets around to people because they were on a local network, and it was e-ink. And so if you wanted to give somebody an article, you give it to them on a physical tablet, and they could read it, and they could also erase it and put a new thing on it and give it back to you. But the idea is that these might be like $3 or $4. You would have badges that you'd wear around your neck to see where you were in the company, and on a little board, you could see if everybody clustered around a specific room, and they actually did this with Olivetti, the original typewriter company. The Olivetti Smart Badge, you could see on a big board, um, who was where, and so you could see them converging on somebody's lab, and you could go and enjoy seeing what they did, and that was the analog social network. The same with Bell Labs, you had that infinite corridor, and you just walk up and down the corridor and see what people were working on. So the shape of space is also governance, and, the shape of space allows people to move, and people can also influence the shape of space, and all of that is, general theory of relativity, but it's also like how things happen. So like building 20 at MIT, which was very messy, um, that was where a lot of really cool innovations came from because it was chaotic. No, so that's a hard thing. We talked a little bit about labor and cleaning spaces. You can cut most of that out because I didn't get to a satisfactory conclusion, and it still doesn't make sense. But it's the idea that that sometimes these messy out of sight spaces that are kind of smelly and grungy outside of the like manicured perfect spaces are where actually the stuff happens. And if you read Richard Feynman's book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, one school he went to had a very messy nuclear reactor setup, and the other school had a pristine, perfect one. Guess where all of the really good um, research papers came out of? It wasn't the perfect one. It was the
Messy.
and you can see institutions become museums of their former selves. And I think that's when it becomes very, very dangerous. Like I went to Banff Institute in 2009 for artist residency, and it looked like a museum of its former self. And that's why I was depressed, because it was no longer messy in a way that you could be an artist and do work.
It's
So,
like democracy is messy on the outside, but actually, like, as opposed to totalitarian, authoritarian regime, which is like super perfect. And
yeah.
yeah,
So I want to say a couple more things. You asked about AI, and I think in most things that people do, if you're learning woodworking, for instance, you're learning about not necessarily history of woodworking, but you're learning to learn it alongside yourself. It takes like a year to learn how to drive or less, or, infinite time to learn how to write. And once you learn it, it's a pass through. A lot of people that say governance is very complicated and are using AI tools have never been part of a functioning governance system. And so they just assume that they can swipe that complexity onto the rug and have it output. But it's almost like somebody on an electrician crew that doesn't really know what they're doing pretending. And they're actually really scared. So a lot of times people who are, in a group house or a group experience, if you turn on the really loud music and everybody cleans, they might not know how to clean. They might not know what they're doing. And so that book, The Phoenix Project, is cool because it talks about, if you expect everybody to put it to this one person who's good at it, how do you get that person out of the way, regardless of what their background is, their position, their gender, whatever? These pockets get shoved into specific types of people. So how do you bring that out? And how do you put people in a situation where they have to learn it and where they actually do it because they're good at it and it feels good? So how do you take that dopamine and put it into it? Because when I grew up, I didn't know how to cook or clean. I just read books and I did homework. And it was very stressful for me not actually knowing how to do those things. So, who I dated needed to know how to do those things, and it put a lot of labor on them. And so, because I was thinking and writing books, and they need to edit my books and they need to help me do it. And it wasn't that I expected them to do it, but they naturally were good at things. And so they did all those things. And after a while, especially in one of them, I needed to learn how to do it myself. And that was very difficult. So, now it's like I will ask for help after I've tried some avenues and I appreciate the problem. But now I'm getting much more self-sovereign on that part. So I think with AI, it's if you know how to do the thing already, like if you're a good lawyer, it's as good as a junior lawyer sometimes. But instead of helping that junior lawyer and developing them into a senior lawyer, you're putting it into a system that's not the junior lawyer. So the junior lawyer is missing a lot of what they could learn. Um, and then that's not uniform, but it is, how do you know when to use it and how do you do the hard work?
And so I feel like both of us just want to keep talking to you about so many things, but unfortunately, due to time, we'll jump to the quiz. And so we'll do rapid fire, couple of questions for each one, looking for a one-word answer. At most, hyphenates are okay. But the first one, so to start off with a more broad one, what's one thing you want people to change about their relationship with technology?
One word is hard. Understand why they're using it and if there was an original process before that they could learn.
How can we rework that into a one-word answer? I guess, is it essence kind of like getting the essence of why people use it in the first place?
And Feynman had this issue about, he called it computer disease, where people were trying to make new stuff instead of just using what you have. So I
Yeah.
would think constraint.
Okay. Constraint. Then what's most lacking in governance conversations these days?
History.
The key to scaling DAOs is,
Sobriety.
and finally, what is the future of governance in one word?
The past.
Love it. Well, Case, thank you so much for joining. We really love the conversation and appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thank you so
hooray.
Thanks for tuning in. The Governance Futures podcast is sponsored by the Scroll Foundation and produced by the governance team at the Foundation, Jamilya Kamalova and Eugene Leventhal. Any music and photos are attested in the episode description. Feel free to subscribe, leave a review, or share with a friend. Until next time.